predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons.
Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades.
A camera hidden deep inside Florida's wilderness captured something nobody expected to see. At first glance, the footage looked ordinary. Just another moment in a remote corner of the Everglades. Yet what appeared on that screen challenged years of assumptions and forced researchers to reconsider a question they thought had already been answered. Because buried within the aftermath of one of the largest invasive species disasters in modern history was evidence that nature might not be surrendering after all. What scientists discovered in Florida's swamps wasn't proof that the pythons were gone. It was something far more surprising. It was proof that the ecosystem may have started fighting back. And if that's true, the future of the Everglades could look very different from what anyone predicted. The invasion. Nobody stopped. The first mistake people make about the Everglades is thinking it was just a swamp. It wasn't. It was a slow-moving river of grass stretching across South Florida, a vast subtropical wilderness that filtered drinking water, cushioned storm surge, recharged aquifers, steadied weather patterns, and supported one of the most intricate food webs in the entire country. Its ecological value has been estimated at tens of billions of dollars annually, not because it was scenic from above, but because of what it quietly did every single day. The Everglades protected. It absorbed, it filtered, and inside that system, life was everywhere. Wading birds moved in enormous flocks above the sawgrass. Alligators commanded the channels. Raccoons, opossums, bobcats, marsh rabbits, foxes, white-tailed deer, layers of life that had been building and refining themselves for thousands of years. Then in August 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore into South Florida as a Category 5 storm. Winds ripped through neighborhoods at over 165 miles per hour. Houses were leveled, buildings were shredded, and near Miami, a reptile breeding facility was torn wide open. When the storm finally passed, Burmese pythons had escaped into the wetlands. But Hurricane Andrew wasn't the whole story. It may not even have been the biggest part. Through the 1990s, Burmese pythons had become popular exotic pets. They were cheap, impressive, and easy to pick up at reptile shows. A baby python could curl around someone's hand. It looked strange and exciting and manageable enough, but baby pythons don't stay babies. Within a few years, that little snake could become a 10-foot, 50-pound predator, and when owners realized they were in over their heads, many made a decision that felt kind in the moment. They drove to the edge of the Everglades and let them go, telling themselves they were setting an animal free. What they were actually doing was releasing a biological weapon into an ecosystem that had no defense against it. For years, almost nobody noticed. The pythons moved silently through grass and water. They dissolved into the mud, vanished beneath the vegetation, and bred inside a landscape that seemed purpose-built for them. South Florida handed them heat, humidity, cover water, and native animals that had never once evolved alongside a predator like this. The Burmese python is built for ambush. Its scales vanish against dead grass and dark water. Heat-sensing pits along its jaws track warm-blooded animals in complete darkness. It can stay submerged for extended periods. A raccoon moving through the night may have no idea the snake is there until the coils are already compressing its ribs. And then there's the reproduction. A single female can lay up to 100 eggs in one clutch. With nothing in the food chain controlling their numbers, the population climbed fast. Today, estimates put the Burmese python count somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 animals across South Florida. Then the data arrived. In the worst affected areas, raccoon populations had crashed by more than 99%. Opossums weren't far behind. Bobcat numbers had dropped dramatically. Marsh rabbits and foxes were functionally erased in certain survey zones, not reduced, erased. Biologists who had spent their entire careers in the Everglades described something they struggled to put into words. Miles of habitat where animals once crossed roads and rustled through brush now sat empty. No movement, no small mammals catching the headlights. The swamp was still alive, but something essential had been hollowed out of it. The invaders had found paradise and they were swallowing it whole. Hunting ghosts in the grass. Florida's first major public response looked a lot like spectacle from the outside. The Python Challenge, an open invitation for hunters to enter the swamp and pull snakes out. Cash prizes, headlines, annual media coverage. It gave people the feeling that something meaningful was happening. But the math was brutal. In 2024, the total haul was 195 pythons. Pulling a few hundred snakes from a population that may number in the hundreds of thousands is like trying to drain the ocean with a bucket. Since 2017, paid professional hunters have removed more than 23,000 pythons. That number sounds massive until you realize it may represent only a small fraction of what's actually out there. The problem was never effort, it was the animal itself. Thermal drones struggled because pythons are cold-blooded and the Everglades runs hot. Mechanical decoys failed because ambush predators don't chase fake prey on cue. The Judas Snake program, where tagged pythons are used to lead researchers to other snakes during breeding season, worked in principle, but not at a scale that could threaten the overall population. The hunters were committed. The technology was genuine, but the swamp was larger than both. Then field teams started noticing something that made the situation feel more unsettling. The pythons appeared to be changing. Traps that worked one season stopped working the next. Areas that had been productive hunting grounds went quiet, not because the snakes were gone, but because they had shifted deeper into terrain that humans could barely access. Dr. Ian Bartoshik and his team at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida documented changes in python movement patterns across multiple seasons. The snakes were increasingly pulling away from areas of human activity. That could mean individual animals were learning from experience, or it could mean natural selection was doing something far colder. The careless snakes were being removed. The cautious ones survived. The cautious ones bred. Either way, the outcome was the same. An apex predator that was already nearly impossible to find was getting better at disappearing. Florida had thrown hunters, drones, traps, and tracking programs at the invasion, and the invasion was adapting. But then the next development arrived from somewhere no one expected. Not from a hunter, not from a drone, not from any government program, from something microscopic, something that had been quietly moving through the swamp for years. The invisible weapon. While researchers were focused on python numbers, another invader was spreading through Florida almost entirely undetected. Its name is Rileyetiella orientalis. Scientists call it the snake lungworm. And when Dr. Christina Romagosa, a research scientist at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, encountered it in native Florida snakes, she immediately knew something was seriously wrong. She was examining native species, garter snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, and other animals that should have been perfectly healthy. But they weren't. They were thin, weak, slow-moving, visibly struggling to breathe. When she examined them internally, she found the cause. Their lungs were packed with tiny worms. Dozens of them burrowed into tissue, blocking airways, feeding on blood, infecting animals that had never evolved to carry them. This wasn't a minor outbreak. It was a hidden invasion. The lungworm is native to Southeast Asia. Burmese pythons carry it without serious consequence because they've had thousands of years to develop a tolerance. Florida's native snakes had no such history. The transmission chain is deeply troubling. An infected python leaves waste in swamp water. Cockroaches feed on that waste and pick up larval parasites. Frogs eat the cockroaches. Native snakes eat the frogs. And inside the snake, the larvae don't stay in the stomach. They tunnel through the stomach wall, migrate to the lungs, attach themselves, feed, and multiply. As the infection advances, the animal deteriorates. It stops eating. Its breathing becomes labored. Eventually, it suffocates. Researchers have documented cases so advanced that lungworms were emerging from the mouths of snakes as they died. Then came the darker discovery. The parasite had already moved well beyond the Everglades. At least 18 native snake species were infected. The lungworm had been documented far north of the original python strongholds, pushing toward Jacksonville. And perhaps worst of all, it no longer appeared to need Burmese pythons to keep spreading. It had jumped. It was now transmitting through native snake populations on its own. Even if every single python in Florida vanished tomorrow, the parasite would remain, self-sustaining, permanent. So the Everglades was being attacked from two directions at once. From above, pythons were eliminating the mammals. From within, lungworms were damaging the reptiles that held the middle of the food web together. But inside that disaster, Romagos's team found one result that didn't fit the pattern. The Florida cottonmouth kept coming back clean. This venomous pit viper, living in the exact same infected habitats as other snakes, showed no signs of lungworm infection across multiple surveys. No worms, no respiratory distress. Nothing. Something in the cottonmouth's biology was making it resistant. Nobody knew why. Maybe it was immune response, maybe blood chemistry, maybe venom composition, maybe something nobody had even identified yet. But the implication was enormous. If one native snake had somehow solved that biological puzzle, that resistance might be the key to protecting others. Scientists flagged it as one of the most urgent unanswered questions in Florida wildlife biology. And while they were still trying to work it out, Florida announced a plan that struck most people who heard it as completely insane. They were going to release more snakes. The king returns. When word got out that Florida officials were putting more snakes into the wild, the reaction was immediate. Wasn't the whole problem too many snakes? People drew comparisons to ecological disasters like the cane toad introduction in Australia, a human solution that became its own catastrophe. But this was different. The snake being introduced wasn't another invader. It was a native predator being returned to a kingdom it had lost. The Eastern Indigo Snake, the longest native snake in North America. A sleek, blue-black animal that can reach up to 9 feet in length and carries itself like the undisputed ruler of the forest floor. The indigo is a snake eater. It doesn't constrict like a python. It pins animals with powerful jaws and swallows them alive. It's immune to the venom of North American pit vipers, rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, copperheads, and eats them without consequence. For a long time, nothing on the forest floor could stop it. But the indigo didn't disappear because another predator outcompeted it. It vanished because its habitat did. The Eastern indigo depends heavily on gopher tortoise burrows for shelter and temperature regulation, protection from Florida's heat and the occasional cold snap. As development erased longleaf pine forests and scrub habitat, gopher tortoise populations fell, and when the tortoises disappeared, the indigos went with them. By 1978, Eastern indigo snakes were functionally gone from North Florida. For decades, conservation groups worked quietly to turn that around. They bred indigos in captivity, restored longleaf pine habitat, reintroduced gopher tortoises, and prepared protected areas like the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve so that when snakes were released, the ecological structure they needed was actually there. Then, in late 2023, a trail camera captured the footage researchers had been waiting half a century to see. 2 small Eastern indigo hatchlings moving through the underbrush. Not captive animals. Wild-born. The first Eastern indigos born wild in North Florida in roughly 50 years. Dr. Kevin Eng, a herpetologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, was among those who watched the footage. He'd spent years helping release and track these animals, watching some survive and others disappear. But this was different. This was proof. The king wasn't just surviving, it was reproducing. For the first time in 50 years, the emperor of the forest floor was rebuilding a wild population on its own. And while that was unfolding in the north, something else unexpected was happening farther south. Native animals that had spent 20 years being eaten were beginning to push back. The home team fights back. For 2 decades, the Everglades story moved in one direction only. Pythons were the predators. Native wildlife was the prey. The invasion spread. The mammals vanished. The food web collapsed. Then Bartoszek's team picked up a transmitter signal from a Burmese python named Loki in Big Cypress National Preserve. Loki weighed around 50 pounds. Field teams had been tracking him for weeks. When they followed the signal to its source, they didn't find a living snake. They found a carcass. The python's head had been chewed off. A nearby trail camera had recorded the encounter. The killer was a bobcat, a native bobcat weighing roughly 25 pounds, about half the size of the snake it had just killed. It had stalked the python, found the right opening, attacked at the right angle, and won. According to those familiar with the footage, Bartoszek watched it and went quiet. Then he wanted every nearby camera checked immediately, because this wasn't just one strange incident. Reports from across South Florida had started showing native predators engaging with pythons in new ways. Alligators ambushing smaller snakes. A Florida panther film taking down a mid-sized python in the sawgrass. Native predators learning exactly where a python is exposed, after a large meal, during a water crossing, during those brief windows when even a near-perfect ambush predator isn't completely ready. None of this means the pythons are losing, they're still winning by sheer numbers. One bobcat cannot undo 20 years of collapse. But the dynamic has shifted. It's no longer a clean slaughter moving in one direction. For the first time, it looks like a war. And wars can turn on moments nobody predicted. Which brings everything back to the footage that started this story. Because the swamp is now moving toward a collision that has never been documented before. The Eastern Indigo population is expanding. Wild-born snakes are beginning to push out from restored habitat in North Florida. At the same time, Burmese pythons have been moving north, following waterways, rising temperatures, and connected habitat corridors. Their ranges are closing in on each other. Nobody knows exactly when they'll meet, but eventually they will. An Eastern Indigo, fast, aggressive, immune to venom, evolved specifically to hunt other snakes, coming face-to-face with a Burmese python that may outweigh it by 40 pounds. The Indigo's advantage isn't size, it's speed, jaw strength, pressure, and the refusal to release. It has taken rattlesnakes. It has taken cottonmouths. But it has never encountered anything like a full-grown Burmese python. Nobody has ever documented that fight. And then there's the darker possibility. The lungworm is also moving north. If the Eastern Indigo expands into infected territory before scientists determine whether it carries any resistance, it could walk directly into a biological trap. The same parasite that has already crossed into at least 18 native snake species could reach the very animal conservationists are counting on to help restore balance. 50 years of painstaking restoration work could collide head-on with a parasite no one yet knows how to stop. That is the real story the cameras revealed. Not victory, not collapse. Something stranger and more uncertain than either. A damaged ecosystem searching for a new equilibrium, caught between an invasive giant, a microscopic parasite, a native predator clawing back from near extinction, and local animals that are finally starting to learn how to fight. The bobcats are learning. The king is reproducing. The cottonmouth may be carrying the answer to a question scientists haven't fully formed yet. And the swamp, after 20 years of silence, is no longer passive. But nobody knows who wins from here. Does the Eastern Indigo arrive in time? Can it challenge the python on its own ground? Does the lungworm reach it first? Does the cottonmouth's resistance unlock something critical? Do the bobcats, panthers, and alligators adapt fast enough to matter? Nobody has those answers yet. And that is exactly what makes the footage from Florida so extraordinary. For the first time in 2 decades of slow collapse, the ending is no longer written. The Everglades is still wounded. The invasion is still real. The parasite is still spreading. But the swamp has started moving again. And the next chapter may be the most violent, unpredictable, and important one this story has ever had.